Well, hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 0 to 60, and it's time to take the 335 with the Gecko Coilovers for its first drive. Now, I've got to be honest, when I pulled the car out of the shed the other night, which is when you last saw me, I drove it down to the front of the house here, and those coilovers felt stiff. Like really stiff. I could feel bumps in the driveway that I've just never felt before. I'm like, oh shit, this is going to be too harsh. So I wanted to put some more road miles on them before I did this video. So I actually drove the car into town yesterday. It was about a 50-kilometer drive, and took it through, well, basically how I'd normally drive the car. So in and out of driveways, shopping centers, car parks, road, speed bumps, that sort of stuff, and a few little pulls, and really get my head around what it feels like. And my God, it is so different. Now, you've got to remember that the shocks on my old shocks were blown out, so they weren't working like a normal shock. But I spent a lot of time in a friend's E92 335. His shocks definitely aren't blown out, and I didn't think mine was that much different. But even like going around roundabouts now, I'm not getting the body roll that I used to get with the original shocks. And this, although it does feel stiffer, I think I've just got to reprogram my head that this is what it needs to be like. Now, I say that because all of these comparisons I was doing in my head when I was driving it yesterday, I was comparing it to how it was before with the blown shocks. And yeah, it's way stiffer, and I can feel a lot more in the road. But when I compare it to Declan's M2, this now feels a lot more like that car. So what I'm going to do in this one, now I haven't actually done any sort of aggressive driving or speed, anything at speed, and we've got a nice little road nearby that I've got some footage of with that front left wheel bouncing around all over the place. The roads around near us are shocking, like not smooth, lots of undulations, potholes everywhere. It's really the nasty shit that you really have to drive on, well, in Australia anyway, a lot of the time with your daily driver. So let's go for a bit of a drive. I'm going to push on it a little bit more, and let's see if these springs and shocks, or coilovers, help put the power down a bit more efficiently. Oh, I guess as well, just to clarify, the rear adjusters are 5 clicks out. The front adjusters are 15 clicks out. And I've done that because the way that this is all sort of set up, I can still bounce the rear fairly easily, but the front feels solid as. So I'm just trying to even out a little bit with the adjusters, but I might end up going a few more clicks out with the rears, but I don't want to make lots of adjustments in one go. So this is how I pulled it off the hoist the other day. I'm going to do probably a week's worth of driving like this before I start making more adjustments from that point. And the reason for that is it's really easy to get, let's be honest, it's really easy to get confused if you make too many adjustments in one go. So I want to spend some time, drive the car in a lot of different conditions with these settings before I start changing things. I do also in the next couple of days, I want to get it back up on the hoist and just make sure that everything's tight, just double check everything. That's something I'd really recommend that you do if you're fitting coilovers to your car. After a day or two of driving, just double check that nothing's coming loose and everything is all safe. Even your lug nuts, you've got to check that sort of stuff. As for the ride height, now that is how it came out of the box. I didn't do any adjustments. They're all sitting pretty even. It's sitting nice and low. Now, I was really concerned, I think I mentioned it in the other video, I was worried about these tyres rubbing. Now, they are a slightly taller profile, and they would rub on the inner wheel arches. You can probably see there, but mine aren't in brilliant condition, which probably contributes to them rubbing. It's something I do need to sort out, but you can see we're pretty close there. And I was worried, this is about 15 or 20 mil lower than it was before with the standard springs, and I was worried this was going to rub a lot. Yesterday, 0 rubs. Couldn't believe it. So it doesn't actually rub at all. I don't know why, but it doesn't rub anymore. And this is how the rears are sitting there. Well, I'm going to get a camera mounted up there, and let's go for a drive. Oh my gosh. It's like 15 degrees today, and my gosh, it feels cold. Not built for cold weather. I'm not. All right, guys, so actually, I should have said it before. If you haven't been following along, this is the 3rd video in this Gecko coilover install series. So I'll put a link to the other 2 videos below. If you are looking at buying Gecko coilovers for your E90, E92, and it might be helpful, especially install. So this road we're going to go on right now. I've got the car, I know it doesn't look like the oil's warmed up, but the coolant temp's getting there. I won't rev it too hard. But this road we're going to go on, it's a crappy road, as I said earlier. And we'll just see how the car handles. A good indicator will be, and I'm going to leave traction on, Where this road typically, with traction on, you'll get the TC light flashing. It's just such an uneven, shitty road. But driving down the driveway, I can feel the stones a lot more than I would with the other suspension. And we've got this little lip that comes out. Like coming in and out of driveways feels quite good. Right. Yeah, on that sort of road, again, they're not great roads here, but she feels okay. Just let these cars go by. Alright. So yeah, I can definitely feel the bumps in the road a lot more. Just gonna lean on it a little bit. Water temps at 80. The car, although I'm feeling more bumps, the wheels are definitely not skipping around like they used to on this road. And this is an old, shitty, uneven surface. It was entertaining driving along here before. You don't feel too bad. It's not too stiff. Like I mentioned in the intro, this is what the M2 feels like down this road. Some decent braking over the brow of a hill. It definitely improved traction in the wet, like massively. It was raining yesterday when I drove the car, where normally this thing, hopefully you've seen the video, but it's just like it's like you're on ice when it used to rain, even with the PS4Ss. And when you get to a surface like this, it feels pretty much like the standard shocks did. One thing I can notice, the floatiness from left to right is completely gone. And you do get that, if you've been in a car with really stiff suspension, you get that, you can see if you look across the line of the bonnet, you can see it sort of bouncing more than you used to against reference points on the road. I hope that makes sense. These do that to a degree. Now I reckon if I wound the rebound adjusters out a bit more, it would sort that out. Bloody cold weather. It takes so long for this car to get warm. Just gonna stick to the speed limit through here. It's quite planted through these corners. Definitely doesn't have the body roll that it used to have. Huge. Ooh, there's a truck. Don't come in my lane. Sweet. Yeah, huge improvement on what they were in terms of handling, which was expected. It's not hard to handle better than blown shocks. It's funny, the car got to like 70 degrees before I started driving. It's so cold that now I've been driving for a few minutes. I think the coolant temp's actually gone down. I don't know why this car is so cool. Okay, so we'll get some speed up along here. Yeah, there's some patchworks in the road at 80, feels quite good. Again, this is a rough surface, not a smooth road. They feel okay. They're not too stiff for the road, that's for sure. I was worried they were going to be skipping on this sort of terrain. Like, it's one thing, all race cars have ultra stiff suspension, and that works brilliantly on a racetrack. And it's something that a lot of people they get caught up in. They want the cars to handle on a track, but if it handles on a track, it's not going to work on the road. End of story. That's weird. That was a reasonable amount of power then, and it didn't. I didn't see any traction warning lights. Unless the GoPro has hidden it from me. I'm just going to pull over and let the car warm up a bit. It doesn't seem to be warming up whilst I drive. All right, well, we've at least got the oil temp gauge showing some temperature, so I'll wind a little bit of boost on. I'm going to run the car in map, I'm going to run it in map 7. So that's only going to target 19.5 PSI mid-range, and it'll taper down to about 15 or 16 through the top of the revs. So it's going to be down 100 to maybe even 200 horsepower on my map 6 tune, but there is no point trying to roll map 6 on in this weather. It ain't going to work. Again, I'm going to drive it with traction control on, so you guys can see how easy there is spin up. A bit of a straight here. Yeah, it actually hooked up. That was 3rd gear, mid-acceleration. Didn't break loose. That wasn't huge throttle inputs, but some boost. That's, I think these are going to be a lot better for putting the power down. So, coming out onto a nice high speed zone. We spun up that time. That was 2nd gear. It's probably a little bit too fruitful on the throttle. But 3rd gear, 3,000 RPMs. I'm gonna roll it on. Okay, that is a lot better. I might have to review the footage. I didn't see any traction lights then, and it pulled quite well in the wet, where it would definitely not do that before. All right. Geckos might be all right. We'll wind up a bit since we're in traffic. Can't believe it's rained for the last 2 days. So, hopefully the camera's sort of picking it up, but sitting at 80 kilometers an hour, the car is not that rough. I'd say it's not bad. Maybe a fraction stiffer than the stock M2 suspension, but definitely dailyable. Definitely dailyable. The more time I spend with these coilovers, the more it just feels like a normal car. I'm getting my head to switch from that boaty McBoat thing that this car was into a car with reasonable suspension. Did take a little while. Traction light definitely come on that time. But it's definitely putting the power down better. 100%, which is awesome. There's no way I could do that in the wet before. Spun up that time. We'll spin up 2nd pretty easy still. Probably expected. But 3rd gear seems to be hooking up all right. 3rd gear, 3rd gear, 3rd gear, 3rd gear. Coming on to boost. Oh, fuck, I'm going a bit quick. Okay. She hooked up in the wet. I like it when you do a mod and it makes the car a lot better. And it didn't cost that much money. So we're on the highway at the moment. 3rd gear. It's a shitty part of the highway, but we'll try 3rd gear roll on again. Ah, she spun that time over a bump. But pretty impressed with it. 3rd gear again. Okay. I think traction control did cut in then, but it still shot the car forward quite nicely. And I'm driving, oh, ambulances. I'm driving with traction on, where normally this car pulls so much power with traction on in the wet. You just turn, even in the dry, you just turn traction control off straight away. I might just do this little section up here again, just a bit quicker. Yeah, she's fucking putting the power down. Yeah, that's a lot better. That is a lot better. I'm very, very impressed with how much improvement that's made to how it puts the power down. Oh, God. This car feels better in the wet than it used to in the dry. Fuck me. Don't drive around on broken shock absorbers. You're doing yourself a disservice. Yeah, this is good. It's very confidence inspiring, which this car's never been huge at making me want to drive faster through the twisties. I'm impressed. And it's not too stiff. Hopefully you can see I'm not bouncing around that much. The rear shocks are set to only 5 clicks out from full stiffness, so there's a lot of room for movement to soften them up. I'm going to head back to the house and I'll do a summary in a few seconds. So I guess to summarise, the main things that I've got from actually trying to put the power down and actually driving the car with a little bit of aggression to it. Like in the wet, this car was unusable in the wet. Even on stock turbos, it was unusable. And now I can actually accelerate in the wet. It's a bit weird after having such shit suspension for so long. Now, something to keep in mind with my review of these Geckos, a lot of my opinions were initially based on comparing it to how this car was with the standard suspension. But my standard suspension was no good. So it's a bit of a poor comparison. And ever since I drove it yesterday, I've been trying to battle in my mind with a way to relay what the hell I'm feeling to you guys. And I guess it makes a lot more sense to compare it to the M2. Now, Declan's M2, spent a lot of time in that. I've driven these roads in Declan's M2 a lot, driven them in the wet. And that is more how this car feels right now with the suspension setup, how I've got it. I'd say I feel a little bit more harshness than the M2, but we're talking a very, very small amount. All the springs are in exactly how they were out of the box from Gecko, which means Gecko are not just slapping them together in a factory. Whoever's putting them together, they're putting them together to a certain point with the springs and the preload all at a certain point, because it just drives too well for it to not to have that thought put into it. Comparing them, and the real thing is, how do they compare to BCs? And I honestly think they are exactly the same. See how we go down the track. If we get more interest in the channel, we might get these Geckos taken apart and Dave's E39 BCs. We'll actually have a look on the inside of them and see how different the pistons and the shim stacks are. I'm sure they're going to be valved differently, one being an E39 and one being an E92, but it would be interesting to see how close they are. I reckon they're going to be pretty damn similar. And even in Dave's E39 M5, when we first got that, the very first test drive, as soon as we went down these roads, we were just like, shit, this feels too stiff, feels like the Evo. And that's how the previous owner was driving that M5, and David just wound everything out to full softness on those BCs, and it makes these sort of roads really good. So I'm nowhere near full softness, and this car actually feels quite compliant. And when I start to put my foot in it a bit, it just hunkers down and goes. I'm pretty happy with them. They're not expensive coilovers. I was expecting it to be too stiff. I was expecting the ride quality to be ruined, because mostly cheap coilovers, they just go for full race car effect, which is fine if you're on the track, but I didn't want to compromise this car, because it is, despite all the silly things we do on the channel, it is my daily driver, and I don't want to lose the daily driverness about it. I've probably rambled on a lot. Yeah, if you're looking at coilovers, don't completely dismiss the Geckos. Hopefully this will help put some more information out there about them. Comparing them to KW V1s and V2s, looking at how those are made, I bet there's not a big difference in them. But it'll be hard to ever find someone that gives you an honest opinion, because most of the YouTubers out there are getting free stuff, and they don't. Also, most of the YouTubers don't know what the fuck they're talking about either. It's hard to take someone seriously that's never fitted a car part before, and they get shops to do everything. Just my 2 cents. In fact, if a YouTuber doesn't do any of the work himself, take what he says with a grain of salt, because he probably doesn't know what he's talking about. Yeah, look, honestly, with all my knowledge from the suspension world, I don't think you're going to get a big upgrade in suspension tech unless you go to something with an external reservoir. As soon as you go to the external reservoir, then you can have a proper compression dampening adjustment and fine tune it more for your driving style. And until you're spending the money on shocks with an external reservoir, in my opinion, it's hard to justify the more expensive things like the KWV3s versus these sort of things. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are people that have been in cars with Geckos, with BCs, with HSDs, all of those sort of $1,000 shock absorbers, as coilovers, that have had a horrible experience. Is that because the person that installed them has wound too much preload on the spring? Are the adjusters wound in too hot and too tight? Like a lot of the cheap stuff, it very much just gets thrown on cars and not properly set up, and that definitely impacts how people think about them. Where with your KWV3s and that sort of thing, normally a shop is installing them, the shop's got an idea on how to let that car roll out of the shop with reasonable settings, like, again, dampening settings and also spring preloads, which will have a big effect on how they ride around town. And that's something to keep in mind. I think, don't get me wrong, I probably would have bought the KWV3s if I had an unlimited budget, because if money's free, why not? But I don't, and with all the knowledge that I've got, and even, I didn't mention these videos, but I didn't just go and buy coilovers. Like, I speak to people in the industry that really do know car stuff. Like I said, I know a few guys from MCA Suspension, and I use their input back to help make the decision that I've made. I mentioned it in one of the comments. I nearly bought BCs because I just knew they would be a safe bet, but the Geckos were a little bit cheaper. I thought it'd be interesting to find some more info on them, and they also had a slightly lower spring rate than the BCs. These are 11 in the rear and 8.5 in the front. I got that wrong in yesterday's video, which is just going to relate to a slightly smoother, less harsh ride over little slow speed bumps, which is where you feel your spring rate more than anything else. All right. I'm going to end it off there. Sorry it's taken so long. I'm definitely happy with the Geckos. I'm going to, like I said at the start of this video, I'm going to drive it for probably a week, exactly how it is right now. I'm going to make sure nothing's loose, but I'm not going to change any settings for at least a week, and then I might start tweaking things from that point on. And if I do make a setting that makes them significantly better, I will let you guys know. But for now, I'm running them 15 clicks out with the front and 5 clicks out with the rear, and springs are set just how they were, how they come from Gecko. And it is definitely dailyable. And yeah, I think it definitely puts the power down better. As soon as this rain F's off, we're going to do another 100 to 200 run. My diff. I was planning to put the diff in tomorrow. I'll explain it in the actual diff video, but I don't have the tool. So I've ordered the tool. Hopefully it'll be here early next week. Which means my Friday video has not gone to plan. Got a few interior bits that I wanted to fit, so I might do that tomorrow. Guys, if you've got it this far in the video, thank you so much. Really appreciate all the help, advice, everything that comes through in the comments. You guys are fucking amazing, and it makes messing around with our cars more enjoyable and easier. It's bloody brilliant. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.